conversation with Dr. Abdulhamid Siam, organized by European Palestinian Youth Union in Sweden, or EPU in short. I'm Mehmet Ali Arslan from EPU, and I will be your host today. My co-host Nejm is in the background doing all the heavy lifting regarding everything technical. He will be collecting your questions for the Q&A during the event, so don't forget to write them in the chat. Please note that this meeting is recorded for future use on our social media accounts, which also means that you can revisit it later. The European Union elections are upon us. Every single party in the Swedish parliament, well, except the fascists, of course, and every single group in the EU parliament, again, except the fascists, still refer to the two-state solution and or the Oslo peace process when they talk about their stance on Palestine, 8 months into this live-streamed genocide. Most of the time, the political class uses the two-state solution as a rhetorical tool to signal to their audience, who are in solidarity with Palestine, that they, the politicians, are also standing with Palestine. But what does it mean in reality? We believe it is crucial to understand what the two-state solution was and is today, and the crucial role the Oslo Accords played in that past and present, in order to chart the way forward for a truly free Palestine. Now that you know why we're here, here's how the meeting will proceed. First, I will briefly introduce EPU and our guest. Then we will proceed with our interview/conversation that should take an hour to 90 minutes. And then we'll take questions from you, the audience, for half an hour. So once again, please feel free to write your questions in the chat, and we will try to fit in as many of them as possible in the end. And please be courteous. If you're not, you will be kicked out of the meeting, just so you know. So what is European Palestinian Youth Union, or EPU? EPU emerged in 2018 to realize a vision of a union of Palestinian youth in Europe, with the purpose of breaking the cycle impacting Palestine, a cycle of silence, violence, a temporary reaction to that violence, and then back to the beginning. Here in Sweden, EPU has become one of the main advocates for Palestine, organizing demonstrations and charity events, among other things. Our goal is to unite the Palestinian movement in Europe for young Palestinians and friends of Palestine, regardless of political or ideological affiliations, to advocate and fight for Palestinian rights, self-determination, and a sovereign independent state of Palestine. That was EPU in brief. Now, let me introduce our dear guest. Dr. Abdulhamid Siam is a Palestinian professor and journalist. He has a PhD in international relations and is a professor and lecturer at Rutgers University in New Jersey. He has been teaching since 2007 on the United Nations and the Middle East, contemporary politics of the Middle East, Arab-Israeli conflict, media in the Arab world, and more. He has worked at the UN for over 25 years as political affairs officer, information officer, chief radio and news center, and more. Since 2014, he has been the bureau chief for the paper Al-Quds Al-Arabi, where he writes weekly about international affairs, UN-related crises, and the conflict in the Middle East. Dr. Siam is a regular commentator for Al Jazeera, BBC, DW, France 24, and other media outlets. And with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Abdulhamid Siam. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Muhammad, and thank you. I want to thank the European Palestinian Youth Union for this opportunity and for inviting me to share some of the ideas and the developments we are going through these difficult days. Thank you.
Thank you. So first off, how are you? How is it to be Palestinian in the diaspora during this terrible times?
Thank you. I think the pain that every Palestinian feels is enormous, and it's beyond description. Seeing that the genocide is going on and you feel that you are helpless and cannot stop it. Being a journalist and going to the UN every day almost, and participating in these press conferences, interviewing all these officials, And you see the shortcomings of the United Nations also add some salt to injury, because you see there are so much double standards in the behavior of the United Nations senior officials and agencies. We have seen the UN is going very bold and fast in some areas, like the war in Ukraine, the war in Iraq in 1991 and 2003, and other crises. But when it comes to the slaughter of a whole population in Gaza, we see that the UN is helpless, completely helpless. So far, most of the UN senior officials have not used the word genocide. They're very careful with wording. Even there are at least 4 senior officials who are supposedly involved with this, or their mandate has to do with genocide or with atrocities against civilians. They even been silent. I can give you just one example. A lady called Alice Ndiritu, she's the UN advisor on the prevention of genocide and the punishment of genocide. That's her job, had been silent. She gave a briefing about 10 days ago to the Security Council on genocide, did not mention Gaza in one word. One word. She did it. Virginia Gamba, another senior UN official, assigned by the Secretary General to follow the issue of children in armed conflict, gave a briefing to the Security Council about a month ago, did not mention Gaza in one word, to the point that at least 2 ambassadors who spoke asked her, how could you ignore Gaza? So I feel, first, as a Palestinian, I know the West Bank. I am from the West Bank. I've been to Gaza several times. I have so many friends. I am in contact with them, with journalists, with the human rights groups, with professors. In fact, we were planning a conference in Gaza in October, October 9, and it was canceled, as you all know. And so that gives me extra pain, but also seeing the helplessness of the international community that also make me frustrated and angry sometimes.
Thank you. It's very understandable, especially since you're working there.
Yes.
Maybe we can start diving into our topic by covering some historical context
Yes.
and talk about the build-up to the Oslo Accords. I was thinking maybe we could start with the First Intifada briefly, because it feels like that's sort of the build-up. But if you have a different view, please go ahead.
I think there was the Palestinian groups and under the PLO, they were united in their program in the beginning. And they reached that national charter in 1968, which
just to clear for people who doesn't know, PLO, Palestinian
Liberation Organization.
Yes.
Which is like the umbrella organization for the Palestinians before declaring the state. So the charter of the Palestine Liberation Organization, which was reached in 1968, and it was adopted by all factions, it used to call for the establishment of a democratic state in Palestine where everyone lived together with no discrimination whatsoever based on religion, gender, ethnicity, or any other thing. That is the program.
So that was the one state solution then.
That's the one state solution. Yeah. That it started, every faction of Palestinian, from be it the Fatah group or the PFLP or the DFLP, or many others, they all agree on this. The future goal is to build a non-sectarian, non-ethnic, non-religious state for all those who live in Palestine. And of course, it was distorted to mean that the Palestinian wants to ethnic cleanse the Israelis. That's not true, by the way. Okay. But not to accept a state that is based on superiority of one group against the other, or to follow apartheid. So this program was uniting the Palestinian for many years, but it has started to change under pressure from the Arab regimes and Western powers. The Arab regimes who were supporting the PLO financially, they started putting some pressure on the PLO to modify their position. And it's especially after 1973 war, which is Egypt and Syria perceived that war as more victory vis-a-vis the defeat of 1967.
It is called the Yom Kippur War.
The Yom Kippur.
Yeah,
the
I mean,
call it,
exactly, yeah,
Palestinian,
exactly.
Arabs call it Ramadan War or the October 6 War. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, at that time, President Sadat put some pressure on the Palestinian to modify their position. So Palestinians did accept the Arab pressure, and they did modify their program from what we could call a liberation program to seeking a state program. And they adopted what is called the 10-point plan in 1974, accepting any kind of Palestinian authority in any part of Palestine. That was the beginning. But that continued, and in 1982, under the Begin-Sharon government, the PLO, or the Palestinian factions, all were pressured to leave Lebanon, which is that a base for their, clashes with the Israelis. And then the Palestinians became weaker between 1982 and 1987. And the Arabs and Europeans start acting as if there is no Palestinian power. Then the surprise came when the first Palestinian Intifada on December 9, 1987 erupted. And it shook the whole world because it was peaceful, it was massive, all sectors of Palestinian people participated, students, teachers, staff, ordinary civilians, women, even children participated in that intifada. The intifada was able to create its own dynamics. So a new kind of middle-age leadership emerged who knows Israel better than those who are outside. They speak the language, they know how to maneuver, and they were also realists. So they were calling for end of occupations, that the program that they all agreed upon is to end the occupation and create an independent Palestinian state. So that's how it came until it became a real official program on November 15, 1988 in Algiers, when the PNC, or the Palestine National Council, which is the parliament of the Palestinian, which encompass all Palestinian factions, independent scholars, intellectuals, writers, journalists, they met in Algiers and they approved the two-state solution. That the goal became at that conference an independent Palestinian state and the recognition of all rights of the state and to live in peace, but also they emphasized the right of the Palestinian refugees to return to their homes and to address the conflict through peaceful means. That was the beginning. And that from that point on, the goal of the Palestinian official leadership was to seek the creation of an independent Palestinian state. Which also I should mention one more point, that after 1973 war, as I said, and the Arabs became a real power after the oil embargo, and they invited the Palestinians to address the United Nations in 1974 when Arafat stood in the General Assembly. He addressed the word and he said, I came with an olive branch and a freedom fighting gun, and don't let the olive branch fall from my hand. In fact, the General Assembly at that session, they adopted an important resolution called 3236, which defines the Palestinian inalienable rights, one by one, 5 points. One of them is self-determination for the Palestinian, the right of Palestinian for independence, the right of Palestinian for statehood without interference, and the right of refugees also to go back to their original homes. And also in point number 5, the right of the Palestinian to struggle. They have the right to struggle to end occupation with the means they have under their disposal without violating the UN Charter. So they put that in conformity with the UN Charter.
But that's
so that
still
is the program. Yeah.
So that last point includes armed resistance as well, right?
It came out in another resolution, the armed resistance,
Okay.
but this one included the right of the Palestinian to struggle to end occupation with all the means.
With all means necessary.
All means,
yeah.
as long as it is in conformity with the charter.
Yeah.
Means that there are rules for the engagement.
Yeah.
I mean, you can fight the way you want,
Yeah.
but for example, you cannot kidnap a child, or you cannot fight a non-combatant civilian. There are, I mean, I'm just my interpretation, but that is what it means in conformity with the charter. But it was spelled out in point number 5. Please take note of that resolution, 3236, and you will see that the UN had defined what are the Palestinian inalienable rights, and they created a committee. It's called UN Committee for the implementation of the Palestinian inalienable rights, and it's still functioning, this committee, to observe the implementations of these rights.
So you mentioned 88, the conference, Algiers conference.
Yes.
That Palestinians decided that the goal is to have a state.
Yes.
Did they have any borders in mind? Like what kind of partition were they after?
Oh, it was very clear that it's meant with the pre-1967 border. That means I mean, it's clear to everyone that Israel is inside this border, what they call the green line of between 1948 until 1967. But the border of June 4, 1967, that includes every piece of land in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza Strip. That is what was understood until today. I mean, you don't see any reference to the two-state solution, except they say on the territory occupied in 1967.
Okay,
that means very clear.
Which is 20, just to be clear, which is 22% of historic Palestine.
Exactly. It's about 22%. It is unfair because the partition plan of 1947 was unfair too.
Exactly. We'll get to that.
Resolution 181. Yeah.
We'll get to that. I have it in my notes. But
please.
So after 88, not so well known point is the Madrid negotiations, right? Which is right before the Oslo, sort of.
Yes.
Could you introduce that to us?
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. Back in 1974, when lots of countries started recognizing Palestinians and they recognized the PLO. In fact, there were more countries recognized the PLO more than Israel. Israel and the U.S. under the auspices of former Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, Henry Kissinger. He was the only one in the history of the US who combined the two most important jobs, Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. They signed agreement with Israel that US will not ever recognize the PLO except if they accept Resolution 242 as the basis for the settlement of the conflict, which was adopted after 1967. And if we have time, we could talk about it, Resolution 242. And the PLO should recognize this right of the state to live in peace and recognize boundaries about Israel, and to give up once and for all violence, or what they call terrorism. In fact, 1988, when the meeting of Algiers took place, although there was fanfare and noise about declaring the independence of the State of Palestine, but in the communique, all these points were mentioned. That the PLO now accept 242 and Resolution 242 and 338, which is the same. 338 was adopted after 1973 war. As the basis for the settlement of the conflict, the right of all states to live in peace and recognize boundaries, and to give up violence and terrorism. In fact, that statement said to condemn terrorism, and they did not accept it. They have to say renounce. In a press conference in Geneva, Arafat, when he said, I condemn terrorism, they said, and the mediator was Sarah Roy, who was known to be advisor and an expert on the Palestinian refugees. When he said, I condemn terrorism, he said, no, you have to say renounce terrorism. And renounce, big difference between condemn and renounce. And that is the beginning of where we ended up. So it started immediately some contact between the US and the PLO in the office of Tunis. And when the US was campaigning to go to war in the Gulf to evict Iraq from Kuwait during the Bush senior administration and James Baker, there were contact, and the Intifada was raging in full force. So there was contact that once the war is over, the US will be involved in negotiation. And that when happened on October 30th, 1991, when the US invited all parties to Madrid conference. And that was the first face-to-face meeting between Palestinians and Israelis, Jordanian and Israelis, Syrian and Israelis. Egyptian were there also, although they had already signed a peace treaty with Israel in 1979. And Lebanon.
Camp David.
In the Camp David Accords, yes.
So, just out of curiosity, you said that they wanted Arafat to say, you renounce.
Yeah.
But did he say that? Did he accept that? Or
he did. He did say it. He did say it publicly. Yes,
okay.
He did.
Okay, so this Madrid conference, it was public, right? It wasn't.
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell us what kind of agreements, or were there any agreements at all? How did things go there?
Out in Madrid. The only thing, Shamir was the prime minister of Israel, and he hesitated to come. He doesn't want to participate. And he put 3 conditions on the US. So to participate, 3. First, he said, every Palestinian is coming should be only from the occupied territories, from what they call Judea and Samaria, which means under their control. And the second, they should be represented within the Jordanian delegation. I will not accept them as separate. And third, which is very strange, Israel said, I only could come and participate if the US gives me a commitment. They will annul that resolution, 3377, which was adopted in 1975 in the GA, equating Zionism as a form of racism and racial discrimination. Shamir told James Baker and the US administration, unless you annul that resolution, I'm not going to come. And the US did. They went to the General Assembly in September of that year, 1991. And President Bush himself went to the podium sponsoring this resolution to annul that resolution of 1975, Zionism is a form of racism. When these three conditions were met, the meeting of Madrid started on 30th of October. It just lasted a day and a half. Only they gave a statement. And then the US invited all of them to Washington to start face-to-face negotiations. Israel said, I will not negotiate with a group of Arab diplomats, Arab representatives. I only can negotiate with each by itself, with Jordan, with Lebanon, Syria, Palestinian, separately.
So they were doing the Abraham Accords even then.
Exactly. So they know that because they could be so lenient with like the Jordanian track, and they could be somehow with Syria and maybe Lebanon, but they want to be, of course, Palestine is different for them. So they have to be, they know what they were doing. And they kept negotiating for 2 years without achieving anything in Washington. To the surprise of everyone, when the stalemate was taking place in Washington and no breakthrough, there was secret meetings in Oslo by a small delegation of the PLO and a small delegation from Israel held some meeting under the auspices of the Norwegian foreign minister and his advisors outside Oslo in a farm, in a friendly atmosphere. And they talked for some time, few months, until they reached an agreement. And that was, it turned out to be the most disastrous agreement the Palestinians had ever reached, the Oslo Accords. Yeah.
Thank you. That was a great breakdown. Very interesting points as well. Like I didn't know that the Madrid negotiations was connected to the UN resolution about Zionism being racism getting annulled. I didn't know that. That was new for me. So now we're at the Oslo Accords, and you already said that it's probably the most disastrous in Palestinian history. Can you summarize it first of all? If we can begin there.
I mean, it's called interim arrangement. It's not a final peace treaty or something.
Okay, so interim, like a...
It's an interim, yes. Yeah, it's like temporary arrangement. And the accord talks about, or the Oslo Accord talks about moving some of the authorities of the occupying power to a Palestinian competent authority to establish security. And the more they prove themselves, they can secure the situation in the West Bank and Gaza, Israel will pass more authority to them until they become in charge. And they said, after 2 years of transferring this gradual transfer of power to the competent Palestinian authority, we start talking about the final issues. And that is the killer of the whole thing. So all the contested issues, which the delegation in Washington refused to compromise about it, and the leader of the delegation in Washington, the late Dr. Haidar Abdel Shafi, one of the most respected and honest and nationalist Palestinian figures, he refused to compromise about the 4 issues. First, the settlement. Second, East Jerusalem. Third, refugees and the right of return. And fourth, the border. Haidar Abdel Shafi, I met him personally. He came to Washington, to New York, and he said, I'm not gonna accept to go back to Gaza without declaring that the refugees had the right to return, or without accepting the fact that settlements are illegal, or East Jerusalem is occupied territory, or the border is to be defined, and when the Palestinians should be in control of that border. That is what he said.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but so that was the delegation in Madrid, right? He was the head of the delegation in
He was
Madrid.
the head also of the head in Madrid, but under the Jordanian umbrella.
Yeah,
but he's the one who gave the speech in Madrid, and it was very effective and very passionate and very honest. And he, in fact, was so much trusted by the Palestinian people.
But the border issue, what did he mean by no compromise on the border? Because Gaza and West Bank and East Jerusalem, they are still not contiguous. They're not attached to each other, right?
No. The issue is that once the Palestinian state is established, it has a border with the outside world. The Palestinian first insisted that there will be defined border between Israel and the West Bank, because I want to emphasize the fact that Israel never defined its border. They don't have constitution, because according to constitutions, you start with, this is our country that defines from the north, from the south, from the east, from the west. Israel does not have a constitution, so as not to define the border. So the Palestinians were saying in Washington, we have to agree on the border, and who will control the border? We have to agree on the border between us and you, between Israel and Palestine on one hand, and we have to agree also who controls the checkpoints, who will enter. Israel said, I'm not going to accept talking about that. How do I know that you will not bring 2 million, quote unquote, terrorists? I want to know who will come and who will leave. I want to know this. And so, in fact, in Washington, D.C., they were talking about these things, and the Israelis had instructions, and the head of the Palestinians, to keep talking. And the Israel put a condition that the talks in Washington should not break down until that they told Arafat, until we finish our work in Oslo.
Okay.
I have to say something also very important. When the Oslo agreement or the terms of Oslo was reached in Oslo before it became public, Israel asked to exchange letters of recognition with the PLO. So Arafat gave a letter to Yitzhak Rabin, and Yitzhak Rabin gave a letter to Arafat. It's called letters of recognition. If you read the letter offered by Yitzhak Rabin and Israel to the PLO, or to the chairman, it has 13 words, which says Israel recognizes the PLO as the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, legitimate only, not sole. The word sole is missing. Legitimate represent the Palestinian people in the context of Middle East peace process, or in the context of peace process in the Middle East. Punto. Nothing else. The letter Arafat offered to Yitzhak Rabin, 1.5 pages. And you can tell, and I can say, I can testify that it was written by the Israelis. That every little details it's written in there. That about security and about controlling all the Palestinian factions, about terrorism, about recognizing Israel with all the details, what it means, and about incitement also, and about the security forces and their role. So anyone with has some really reasonable mind will not accept this unbalanced letters of recognition, which gave Israel so much power and so much leverage and didn't give the Palestinians anything. So neither the letters of recognition nor the Oslo Accords spelled out the illegality of settlement, nor it spelled out that East Jerusalem is occupied territories. It didn't talk about refugees. It didn't talk about the borders. And it left everything is open to the final status negotiation, which never happened.
But okay, so a couple questions. So the delegation that went to Madrid and then to Washington, they had no idea about this, right? They didn't know that this was happening.
No one knows.
No.
I mean, the number of people of the PLO who knows about it, probably less than 5 people.
Wow.
Same thing on the Israeli side. I don't know exactly, but the number is very small. Yeah.
Okay, but then so these letters of recognition, do they constitute the Oslo Accords, as we call it, or was it
No,
was it a separate thing?
It's a separate thing. Without this exchange of letters of recognition, Oslo will never happen.
Okay, so that was like the prerequisite.
A prerequisite, yes, exactly. Okay. So we want to know where we're going. So we recognize you, Israel said in that letter, we recognize you to talk to you, to negotiate.
Only in this context.
Only. It was mentioned, literally, word for word, in the context of the peace process in the Middle East.
It is truly unbelievable.
Yeah.
Okay, but if we go to the details of the accords themselves, what were they?
Exactly. That's what I mean, it's a lot of details, but it's only basically about transferring the authority to the Palestinian. And it was so shallow that it was followed by many other agreements. It was followed by Oslo II in Taba, Egypt, 1995. It was followed by the Paris Economic Agreement also, which was another disaster. And it was followed by the Wye River Agreement in 1998, because Oslo itself is just a partial transfer and gradual transfer of power to the PLO. Of course, there are many details. Who will come in? What kind of weapons they will carry? Which areas they will come? Who will come inside? Where they're going to be located? They started with one first stage. It's called Gaza and Jericho first. So they established the authority in Gaza and Jericho, and then it expanded, and then it expanded, and then when the Palestinians, felt that they were not happy with what happened, and nothing of the promise or the understanding they had about starting the negotiation about the final status issues in 2 years and not to exceed 5 years, which was supposed to be concluded completely in 1999. And during this period, Arafat was speaking right and left and say, the state will be declared in 1999 if they like it or don't. And if they don't like it, let them drink the water of Gaza, the sea in Gaza. Okay, that he was, but the Israelis did not, of course. And there was opposition from both sides. I mean, Rabin himself was gunned down in 1995. And a Jewish extremist entered the Al-Khalil, the Hebron, and the Al-Haram Al-Ibrahimi, or the
mosque,
patriarchs, or Al-Haram Al-Ibrahimi, on Ramadan in February, gunned down 29 Palestinians and wounded 150 in this the dawn prayer, and then Hamas responded with a 3 suicide bombing, killing 60 Israeli civilians, and everything was mixed up. The Israeli assassinated a Hamas leader called Yahya Ayyash, or they call him the engineer, and Hamas responded with so many attacks also.
But when was this? So the Ibrahimi massacre.
Exactly in 1994, February, it was Ramadan in 1994.
Okay.
And the UN, in fact, condemned that massacre and passed Resolution 904, authorizing the use of foreign observer to watch the situation in Hebron. And there were some Nordic observer with no guns, of course, civilians, from Norway, Sweden, Finland, and I think maybe
details, not so important maybe.
Yeah.
But if we so it sort of means like that the Palestinian, not all the Palestinian factions were happy, maybe most, we could say maybe. So what was the sort of, in the beginning, what was the reaction of the Palestinian people and the factions and their representatives?
Well,
and then how did it change in time?
In fact, yes, in the beginning, I could say, of course, I mean, there were opposition to the Oslo Accord from the beginning. I mean, Hamas did not agree, Jihad did not agree, PFLP did not agree.
Sorry, when you say jihad, it means Palestinian Islamic Jihad, right?
Yeah, Islamic Jihad.
Yeah, just for people
talk about the factions, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
However, the Palestinian people in the beginning were jubilant. They thought, let me say this, it was marketed to the Palestinian people as the end of their suffering. The state is coming, prisoners will be released. In fact, let me tell you a personal story, if you don't mind. I went back at that time to visit my family, and my father was in the hospital, so I went there. I was a UN official, so I traveled with the UN passport.
And when you say there, you mean West Bank?
West Bank, yes. So I went to my village near Jerusalem, and I was talking to a few youth. I don't know them because they're younger than me. And so I asked them, what do you think? Oh, they were happy. I told them why. So they said, okay, because settlement will stop, prisoner will be released, then our state is coming in a few years. And I mean, the refugees will return. So what else we need? That's it. Do you think we're gonna eliminate the state of Israel? Can we do that? No, we want to be realist, and that's the best we can get as a deal. I asked them a question. Did any of you read the Oslo Accord? And none of them did. None of them. So what I meant by the leadership marketed the Oslo Accord as a great success, a story. Oh, they said, okay, fine. I mean, our state is coming, and the prisoner will be released, all the settlement activity will, but none of that's written in the Oslo Accord.
But did they believe that themselves?
The Palestinian welcomed the agreement. They thought it's really a new beginning. Yeah.
Did PLO and Arafat think that as well? In the beginning.
I think Arafat knows. Look, Abbas himself, which was like deputy Arafat, he wrote a book about the road to Oslo, and he said in that book, this could take us to make Palestine a Hong Kong or Somalia. So that's what he wrote. So they know that it is a vague agreement. And they thought, and that I think Arafat, of course, later, he admitted his mistake, for sure. For sure. That's why the second Intifada, maybe he didn't start it, but he was behind it. or he supported it at least.
He wasn't against it, at least.
No. I think Arafat believed that the US is the guarantor. And he trusted Clinton. It was President Clinton.
Mm.
And of course, he also trusted some of the Arab leaders. At that time, three of the most important leaders, I mean, King Hussein of Jordan, and Mubarak of Egypt, and King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia were all behind him. And in fact, they pushed him to do that.
Mm.
So he said, if I have all the Arabs with me, and the UN was supporting the agreement, and Boutros Ghali, at that time, the Secretary General, attended the ceremony in the White House on September 13, 1993, signing the accord. And the US is there, so Israel cannot escape the conditions to create to continue or to implement this agreement. And we will move from this point to a Palestinian state. That's what Arafat believed. Then he realized soon that is not the case, because settlement activity did not stop. Prisoners were not released. Violence continued. The opposition to Oslo Accord from Israel is high, including Netanyahu, for example. He opposed to it, and he ran for the office, and he became the prime minister in 1996, following Rabin assassination, who was opposed openly against Oslo. And from the Palestinian side, Hamas and Jihad, the two most important factions, and the PFLP were against Oslo. So Arafat knew he was navigating in a very contaminated area and dangerous minefield. So he took the risk, thinking that the US will not disregard him. But they did. They did. And the first challenge came, and the US, they put pressure on Arafat in the Camp David II talks in July 2000, when Clinton invited Arafat and Ehud Barak to the Camp David resort, and they spent 18 days talking. And there is so much, some points were addressed and reached. I mean, they were close to an agreement, with the exception of Jerusalem, because they wanted Arafat to sign Jerusalem off, and he couldn't. And he told Clinton, if I sign this, you will walk in my funeral the way your predecessor walked in Sadat funeral and you walked in Rabin funeral. I can't. This is Jerusalem. If you want, get me approval from Jordan and from Egypt and from Saudi Arabia and from Pakistan and because Jerusalem does not belong to me. It belongs to the Muslims. Bring me an agreement and I will sign. The Israelis want the American and the Israeli, the Americans were just messengers for the Israelis. They want the sovereignty of Jerusalem in the hands of Israel. They will give only the Palestinian access to the holy places, okay? And they free, they can go pray and leave. And they said, it's impossible. How do you want me to agree, to accept that? Yeah.
So in my head, at least, when I hear about the Oslo Accords, I think directly about the Palestinian Authority of today. How did it emerge? How was it connected to the Oslo Accords?
It was a byproduct of Oslo. Oslo is about creating a Palestinian authority, of course, blessed by Israel and the US, financed by Europeans and the US, to do that, to establish security in the occupied territories, which the Israeli failed to do. And this authority will be empowered by the foreign countries in terms of finance, in terms of training, in terms of even establishing some relations. So they were hopeful that it will emerge a real authority, but Israel did not allow even this authority to take over some of the areas that they need to. For example, the taxes. It's Israel who collect the taxes and collect them, take, I think, 15 or 20%, and then transfer the money
when they want.
Yeah, and if they are angry or if there is a crisis, they keep it, as was just decided a few days ago.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the checkpoints is there, so people will suffer in the checkpoints while they give VIP to the Palestinian Authority, which alienated them from their people, and they became very unpopular, honestly. And I say that out of experience, being going back and forth. And they did not truly empower them to lead, because you cannot lead your people if you're not close to them, and if you stand against their overall sentiment and wishes. You can't. I mean, when Israel entered the major cities, which supposed to be under Palestinian Authority, and they don't do anything, then they are discredited. Yeah. And for the sake of that, just to explain it, they divided the territory into 3 areas, A, B, C. A is where the Palestinians control both the security and the administration, which is about 3%.
Just quick question there before you keep using the word security, but whose security?
For Israel, it means their security only. I mean, the Palestinian security, it has not been kept. It has not been implemented, neither from the Israeli army nor from the settlers. So for Israel, security means security for Israel and the settlers as well. Yeah. And we have to know that when Oslo Accord was signed, 1993, there was about 150,000 settlers, many of them close to Jerusalem. There was a big settlement near Hebron called Kiryat Arba, another one in the north. But most of these settlements were established after Oslo. We're talking about now about over 800,000 settlers. There are over 240 settlements, some of them as huge as a city. Ma'ale Adumim, near east of Jerusalem, is a city. Ariel, near Nablus in the north, it's a city. Officially, it was declared a city. It has an accredited university. So all these settlements came after Oslo, because Oslo did not specify that settlements are illegal and should be stopped. And no one, as Haidar Abd Shafi, the chief of the negotiating team in Washington, he said, I will never sign an agreement unless it specifies settlement activity should stop. That's what happened. That's the tragedy of the Oslo Accord. And they divided, as I just said, the area A, B, and C. A is under Palestinian control, both security and administration. For example, if there is a crime, if there is an accident, the Palestinian Authority will take care of that. B is the administration for the Palestinian Authority and the security for Israel. And C, which is 60% of the West Bank and Gaza, it's for Israel, both administration and security. So that is the new invention of what is called Oslo II, which was signed in Taba under the auspices of President Mubarak. Yeah.
Before we move to more about the two-state solution, the idea of two-state solution itself, and before Oslo, was there anything good about Oslo?
I don't want to be to be objective. I mean, a few things where we could see that first, it brought about 100,000 Palestinians back to the West Bank and Gaza. All those security who were scattered in Tunisia, Algeria, Yemen, Syria, Iraq, etc. So that's one thing.
So that included some seasoned resistance fighters, right? If I'm
Some
not
of them,
mistaken.
yeah, some leaders, yes, yeah, the leaders. I mean, because when some of the senior leaders did not accept to go back, by the way, and they cannot go under the, as they said, under the protection of Israel. They cannot. And at least three leaders resigned after Oslo, including Mahmoud Darwish, the famous poet who was a member of the PLO executive committee. He resigned. So that is one thing. They say, oh, we brought 100,000. The second, it gave the Palestinian some leverage to become a little bit more immune of intervention and interference by Arab countries. I mean, between the 1982 and 1987, after the departure from Beirut and before the Intifada, Arafat was completely marginalized, completely. And no one wants to associate himself with him. He even came to a summit meeting in Amman, and nobody went to the airport except to receive him, except a junior member of the state of the foreign ministry, and he wanted to take the plane and leave. Then Saddam Hussein, at that time of Iraq, went to bring him because he felt insulted. So they said, okay, when they moved to the West Bank and the headquarters was first in Gaza, then Jericho and Gaza, then to Ramallah, it gave Arafat a little bit more leverage. Yeah. And Palestinian people believe that Arafat could make mistakes, but they feel that he is nationalist. He will not betray the Palestinians. I mean, it's like there is a famous saying among Palestinians. We say, we disagree with you, but we don't disagree on you. We have so many differences with you, with Arafat, and his sometimes erratic behavior in terms of dealing and wheeling. He's a good in that. But no one can match his status,
posture.
Yeah, exactly. So he was considered to be a national symbol, a national hero, whatever you want to call it. Of course, there are many opposed to him, including myself. And I thought the disastrous Oslo Accord brought us all these miseries. But no one can accuse Arafat of selling out or committing treason. And especially after the Oslo meeting in Camp David in 2000, in July 2000, when he refused to sign. In fact, when he came back, he received a hero's welcome because he didn't sign that attempt to impose on him an agreement that is not to the satisfaction of the Palestinian people.
That would sign off Jerusalem, just to remind.
Jerusalem, yeah.
I think you cut off a bit there, but I think what you said was, even if Oslo was a disastrous accord, he was still seen as not as a traitor.
Yes, they still, people in general, the public still trusted Arafat.
Yeah. If we look at his the people after him, namely Abbas, would he be called a traitor now?
I try to avoid the word traitor because it's a very big word. But I don't think he is. He has the quality of a leader. First, Arafat has a dispute with him. He was imposed on Yasser Arafat to be the prime minister by the US. By the US.
Mm-hmm.
And he went to speak in a meeting in Aqaba, Jordan, about what is called terrorism. It came in the aftermath of some Hamas suicide bombing.
Arafat or Abbas?
Abbas.
Abbas.
Mm. Abbas as prime minister.
Mm-hmm.
He gave a speech in that conference with there was President. It was 2001, I think, and President before September 11.
Mm-hmm.
Because Hamas, I think, carried out 3 suicide bombs at that time. And they held a meeting in Aqaba about terrorism, and many of the Middle Eastern leaders were there. So Abbas gave a speech, and the speech was perceived to be selling out to the Palestinian people, the Palestinian cause, because he spoke in that speech about the suffering of the Jewish people. It's strange strange of everyone. Arafat is smart enough. He saw the speech before he delivered it, and he said, "That's a great speech. Go ahead, go. Give the speech." He gave the speech, and there was outrage in the Palestinian territory about that speech. Mm. So Arafat, smart enough, because he felt that Abbas was imposed on him. He called him Karzai of Palestine. Mm. Arafat called him. Mm. You know, Hamid Karzai of Pakistan, who the Americans brought him on the tower of a tank. Mm. So he called him Karzai. So Abbas resigned. He resigned. Mm. And he was discredited at that time. When Arafat died, we have to know that it's a very mysterious circumstances. No Palestinian believes that he died of natural causes.
No.
That crossed the board. Yeah. Mm. A group of people around Arafat, they thought that he is becoming an obstacle to continue with the negotiation with him. So he was removed, we believe, and all Palestinians know. And, you know, there was 3 committees established. Russian committee to investigate his death, Swiss committee to investigate his death, and French committee too, and a Palestinian committee too. And none of them came with a concrete answer why he died. Al Jazeera channel did its own investigation and came up with a great and concrete result that he was poisoned. Al Jazeera.
No, I remember his siege, watching it from TV.
Then when they put him under siege for 2 years.
It was terrible. But so what did they think he was an obstacle against, the people around him then? Because like what did these people want? I mean, did they want to represent the Palestinian people, or did they want to represent their own interests?
There were two schools of thought among the Palestinian leadership. One school represented by Abbas, and he doesn't shy about it. We cannot achieve anything with fighting or with intifada or with violence. We have to negotiate.
Submit.
Negotiate, he said.
Okay.
Yeah. He and Saeb Erekat and all that team, they think negotiation is the only solution. In fact, Saeb Erekat, chief negotiator, wrote a book. It's called Al-Haya Mufawadat. Life is negotiation. Yeah. So this group, they believe that Arafat's support of the second intifada, it hurt the Palestinian cause much more than if he was not involved and there was no intifada. Mm-hmm. And apparently Israel was, of course, they intercept every phone call, every check cashed, every visitor, everything. You know that. The West Bank is so small.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gaza. So,
and I mean, just to add, their technology is,
of course,
it's tested on the Palestinian population.
exactly.
There's surveillance that they sell to everywhere.
The
So
satellite, the phone,
Yeah.
everything.
yeah,
So apparently they were able to detect Arafat in supporting Marwan Barghouthi, who's serving a life
sentence.
sentence in jail, supporting him with what called Shuhada al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, who were fighting in the Second Intifada.
They are now the Fatah's armed wing, right? If I'm not
Yes.
mistaken. Okay. And just to add to people, in the list of prisoners that Hamas wants to exchange, Marwan Barghouti is one of the top names that
As
they
on
want.
top, yes, exactly. So at that time, Prime Minister of Israel, Sharon, he took some documents or some intelligence information to President Bush. And he told him, look, what is this man is doing about Arafat. And then Bush declared him as is not a peace partner. He's no longer a partner for peace. Then he said, he told Sharon, leave him to his destiny. He's old and he's not going to survive. In a way, I mean, leave him to his destiny. He said, Sharon said, as it's been documented, that sometimes you have to interfere on the side of fate to make things happen faster. That's what being circulated among the Palestinians. Everyone believes that he was eliminated, but through those group around him, everyone, they start accusing each other. I'm sorry to say that. And Mohammed Dahlan, the chief of the preventive security, and Abbas were on one side and Arafat on the other. But then Arafat, after Arafat passed away, Dahlan and Abbas clashed, and they start accusing each other who's behind the elimination of Yasser Arafat.
But if we leave Arafat's murder, let's say that, because it was, I think everyone agrees now that it was murder. But if we move from that to the current PA, and we see that today they are actively killing the resistance leaders in West Bank. I mean, at least that's what we read from.
Let me say one thing. Not one single Israeli official really believed in granting the Palestinians a real, independent, contiguous, sovereign, viable Palestinian state. Quote me on that, and I can approve it. Not one single Israeli prime minister from 1967 until this minute did not advance the settlement activities. None. None of the Israeli prime minister or officials did not create obstacles ahead of establishing a Palestinian state. That's for sure. No Israeli prime minister wants to see a real independent Palestinian state. In 1977, for example, Menachem Begin was running for office. His slogan was, between the river Jordan and the Mediterranean, there will be no state except Israel. And Netanyahu himself, he took pride of preventing the establishment of Palestinian state. In 2018, and under this prime minister, the Knesset adopted a basic law. And if you know what's a basic law in Israel, that means it's like Jerusalem has a basic law. That's the unified eternal capital of Israel. It was adopted in 1980.
It's like the main articles of a constitution that they don't have.
They don't. Basic law, that means you cannot annul that law except by 2/3 majority in the Knesset, which is almost impossible. In 1980, I'll repeat, in 2018, the Knesset passed called the National Identity Basic Law, defining Israel. That law defined that Israel is the national historic homeland of the Jewish people. And it says between the river and the sea, the self-determination is exclusive right to the Jewish people. And Jerusalem is the eternal capital. And that is very clear. If anyone has doubt that Israel is determined not to allow or create the opportunity or permit any kind of loophole that might be a state might be established, then it's wrong. So what we have seen now as a policy, expand the settlement, empower the settlers to harass and terrorize the Palestinian people, kill their leaders, destroy the resistance movement. And the resistance for them, by the way, if you carry a flag, then you are considered a terrorist. If you scream free Palestine, then you are a terrorist or anti-Semite. If you are in Israel, then you are a terrorist. If you are outside, then you are anti-Semite. So that is across the board, and especially with this most extreme government in the history of Israel, led by the trio, Netanyahu, Smotrich, and Ben Gvir. This is unprecedented. The laws they're passing against the prisoner, look what happened in Gaza. This is unprecedented in modern history, that the world is watching a savage war against children, against women, against hospitals, against universities. All the universities were destroyed, all the hospitals, all the shelters, all the UNRWA schools. There are 620,000 now students without schools.
Yes.
Anyone has a doubt what they are doing is to obliterate the Palestinian people?
So while this is happening, so I'm going to go back to my question. While this is happening, isn't the Palestinian Authority right now targeting the resistance that is trying to emerge within West Bank, killing their leaders? Because those are the reports we're getting.
I could say that the Palestinian Authority, if it's not killing them, it's collaborating with the Israelis to arrest them or kill them. The Palestinian Authority, their lifeline is the relation with Israel. If Israel cut off the relation with them, stop the flow of the tax money to them, and stop the cooperation with them, completely they will collapse the next day. So this leadership, which is becoming a team tied to each other by interest, they see their survival as linked to the satisfaction of Israel and the US. And by the way, the Israelis don't like the PA. They don't like any entity to speak on behalf of the Palestinians. They don't want to see any kind of Palestinian. They might agree to the kind of the Village League, which they established in 1977, which is like puppet. They could live with that. They tried, in fact, but they failed. But this kind of leadership now, its survival is linked to the Israelis and to the US and Europeans, who still think that this leadership is qualified to rule the West Bank and Gaza the day after the war is over.
The day after, exactly.
Yeah. And they are waiting for, this leadership is waiting for the war to end. They didn't put any effort, by the way, to stop the war, except some rhetoric. I mean, Abbas spoke in the Arab Summit meeting recently in Manama, Bahrain, and he gave a very controversial statement about the right of Israel for full security, which annoyed every Palestinian.
Yeah, he said something like the security of the Israelis is sacred.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And he said in the past also that security collaboration with Israel is sacred. So he keeps giving these controversial statements. And they believe that once the war is over, they will be qualified to rule Gaza and the West Bank, and they will take the money for reconstruction, and Hamas will be completely eliminated. Yeah, that's what they believe.
To quote our previous lecturer, Justin Potter, they have to win the war first, and
They
they are
have
not winning the war.
exactly. We don't know.
But okay, I mean, you don't want to say the word, but the way you described it sounds to me like treachery, I have to say. I mean, if their survival and continuation as the authority depends on their collaboration with the genociders during a genocide, and that means they would help eliminate the resistance within West Bank among themselves. I mean, I don't know how more treacherous you can get
Yeah.
beyond that, to be perfectly
Yeah.
honest with you. But I'm not
Yeah.
I'm not gonna put words in your mouth.
No, I don't want to put that.
Yeah.
I described the situation well.
Yeah. Yeah.
You pick the label you want to use.
Yeah.
I
Sure.
am a writer. I write every week a column at
Mm.
one of the most important Arabic daily, Al-Quds Al-Arabi, based in London. And my views are very well known. And I never compromise with this leadership without using sometimes these terms. They know my
Inflammatory.
position.
Yeah.
They know
Sure.
my position. I speak on many channels. I make my point known, be it here from the US or being from Ramallah. In
That is.
fact, when I was in Ramallah and I was interviewed by Al Jazeera, I was a little bit more harsher on them than I'm here because I don't want people to think that, oh, I speak with loud voice when I'm in America, but I don't. I lower my tone when I'm in Ramallah. That's not the case.
No, I respect that. As I said, I don't want to put any words in your mouth. You described it great. Okay, now maybe we can just move on to the idea of a two-state solution, which you already mentioned a bit, that it wasn't it
Yeah.
because in most people's mind right now, and that was me as well actually, that it was connected to the Oslo Accords.
Yeah.
But it as you explained, it wasn't. I mean, there were different precursors to this. Even in 1948, I mean, there were some partition plans.
Yes.
Can you give us a short, brief introduction to that as well? Like what kind of previous two-state solutions were, let's say, not available, but actual in the times, maybe. I don't know.
I mean, Palestine was a state, not necessarily recognized. After World War I, it was part of the Ottoman Empire. But when the League of Nations decided to create this mandate, they classified Palestine level A, which means very close to independence, because at that time, contrary to all the propaganda, Palestine was fully fledged, viable state. It has an airport, it has a seaport, it has oil refineries, they used to export 4 million piece of oranges, famous for Jaffa orange. It has schools, it has sport, it has Kulthum used to come from Egypt and perform, the most famous Arab singer in history, performed in Haifa and Jaffa. So all that propaganda that Palestine is not viable, it was. And there were, by the time of Balfour Declaration, 1917, there was about 7 or 8% of the population are Jews. So, but the Zionist program, I mean, from the day that Herzl wrote his book, Jewish State in 1896, they think that the whole entity, it's called this Palestine, is theirs. So they are all indoctrinated that this piece of land, which is Palestine, is theirs. And they followed through. I mean, Jabotinsky, who was a revisionist, was most extremist. And it's he who produced all these extremists like Stern and other gangs. He
And
has
he could be labeled as the grandfather of Likud as well, right?
Exactly, Jabotinsky.
The party of Netanyahu, Likud.
Yes, the Likud and the Menachem Begin and Shamir. He has a song for his team. The river Jordan has two banks. This bank is ours, and the other bank is ours. That's what they. And Ben Gurion as well. I mean, he refused to define the border because they know. I mean, they have more ambition in the West Bank, more than even Tel Aviv. But they think that their history was not in Tel Aviv and in Haifa, but in Hebron and Nablus. So he refused to define the border. When he asked, where is your border? He said, our border is decided by the boots of the army. And after 1967, immediately they started annexing, they eliminated villages, they annexed Jerusalem, unified it. They started establishing immediately settlements. And they never had that idea of establishing a state, a real state. The idea of the state came, in fact, as I said, it was under pressure from the Arab regime, who were pressured by the US. And recognizing the PLO in 1974 as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people was the stem. Because Sadat was telling them, come on, don't be realist. What are you talking about? Liberation of Palestine is impossible. So that's where the idea, and it came as in that resolution of the UN. But after the year, after 1990, when Iraq occupied Kuwait, and they were talking about settling the Palestinian issue, which came out in, as we spoke, in Madrid and Washington, and they reached the Oslo Accord, everyone was in mind that about the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. That is the future Palestinian state. Now, it became a real document in the year 2002, when President Bush was preparing to go to war with Iraq, and he wants to lure Arabs to support him. And he put it as a program for what is called the roadmap of the quartet. The quartet, which was established by the US again, is made of 4 groups: UN, European Union, Russian Federation, and the US. And these 4 groups, who will handle the issue of Palestine and the settlement, they put together what's called roadmap. And the roadmap is reaching the goal of the two-state solution. In fact, Condoleezza Rice, I remember very well, she said in 2005, the Palestinian state will be established. And not only that, the US went to the UN, the US, and they sponsored 2 resolutions. Mark it, write down Resolution 1397 of 2002. It talks about the vision of the two-state solution. Vision. And the following year, 2003, US sponsored Resolution 1515. The first time this resolution spells out the two-state solution. It became a UN resolution. It became UN, all the UN culture about the two-state solution inspired or based on these 2 resolutions, 1397 and 1515. From that day on, no one talks except about the two-state solution. Two-state solution, while Israel creating facts on the ground. I asked the Secretary General, after 1 year of his tenure in the UN,
Antonio
Guterres, I asked him, Mr. Secretary General, That, I think, 2019 or 2018. Do you believe, honestly, I told him, please honestly tell me, frankly, do you believe there is any chance to establish a viable, independent, contiguous, sovereign Palestinian state? He answered me saying the following: I understand your frustration, exactly, word for word. And I wish I can think of another plan. I wish I have a plan B to talk to you about, but I don't. And since we don't have plan B, we have to go back to the two-state solution. Times goes by, okay? And 6 years later, I asked him the same question. I told him, look, you've been in office for 6 years. You talk to me this, and now I ask you the same question. Is there any hope there will be a two-state solution? He went on and on and on and gave me back the same answer. I asked this question to every senior official of the UN. I asked him to Foreign Minister of the Russian Federation, Lavrov. I asked the same question to President Hollande of France when he was president. I asked him to Mahathir Mohamad, the president
Malaysian.
of Malaysia, to many Arabs. No. Is there a chance? Do you see any hope of the two-state solution? They have no answer. They go back and they start running around the bush. And I want to tell you, the idea of having a two-state solution will need miracles. How can you uproot all these settlements? How are you going to change? The Israel established a wall, separation wall that has 450 miles. Israel has settlement, not only big settlement, but the small, what they call outer, they call they are illegal, what they call it, legalized, or not, they don't call it illegal, but they call it unauthorized.
Okay, unauthorized, yeah.
Unauthorized.
Soon to be authorized.
Yeah, exactly. So where the two-state solution going to be established? If you go from one village to the other, you go through checkpoints. Settlements are everywhere, and they have their own roads. So since
their own securities,
roads, yeah, and not only that, but every road has a security zone. So you have to be like 6 meters here of security, and so to take more land. The wall had to taken 15% of the Palestinian land of the West Bank. There are some Palestinian villages which is encircled completely from all sides. And they enter through a gate. They lock the gate, and everyone is in jail. Everyone in prison. A village called Azun, I visited that village. And they close the gate at 6 p.m. If you are a worker or something, or if you're a student, and it happens to be late, you cannot go back to your own town. The situation on the ground, if I want to talk about the little things, little details of life in the West Bank, I can talk for hours and hours.
Yeah. That's why people like Desmond Tutu, who actually lived through apartheid, said that it's maybe 100 times worse than
much worse.
Nothing
is complete. And there is at least 1,000 issues people outside don't know about.
Yeah,
they don't know. Okay, I mean, you ask for a permit to go visit a place, it will take forever. Yeah, they don't. I mean, even garbage collection, if it's in the area where Palestine, although it's in Jerusalem, which they call, if it's Palestinian side then is one thing. If it's Israeli side, it's another. Yeah.
We have reached the 90 minutes mark.
Yeah.
We don't have so many participants right now. So if it's fine, I will keep asking a couple more questions because I think there's still some stuff to talk about that I don't want to leave out. Because
Okay.
if it's okay with you as well.
I could take a question or two.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because we have this election coming up.
Yeah.
And people
You talk about European elections
European
or the
elections,
US elections?
European elections, no, not the US. Since we're in Sweden, it affects us a bit more directly. And people I see in social media and people around me as well, they don't really know who to vote for, especially because of their stance on Palestine. Because everyone that sort of claims to support Palestine refer to the two-state solution. Still, I mean,
Yeah.
what do you say to that? What is your response to that?
Very good. I think they should ask him, how can you support the creation of two-state solution and you don't speak against settlement and dissolving the settlement? How can you blindfold yourself from the separation wall, which the ICJ decided in 2004 it's illegal, should be dismantled, and Palestinians should be compensated? You cannot just give a slogan, two-state solution. Where is the two-state solution?
I mean, there are
Do
some.
you agree?
Sorry,
Do you support the dismantling of every settlement in the occupied West Bank? And the best question is, do you agree that the settlements are illegal? They will say yes. If it's illegal, why you don't speak against it? Why you don't? Do you agree that a Palestinian state cannot be established and become viable and contiguous if there is 800,000 settlers there? And it has to be connected with Gaza also. How you destroy Gaza completely, 80% of all the buildings in Gaza have been destroyed, all the health system, all the educational system. And what does it mean to support the two-state solution? Do you support apartheid?
Exactly. I mean, that's another point because like we have some politicians saying, oh, and the occupation and so forth as well. But they don't talk about Zionism at all. And especially after 8 months of genocide, without talking about Zionism, how can we talk about a two-state solution? Will there be a Palestinian state and then a Zionist state that constantly wants to eliminate them?
I think we have to be clear. Either there will be two states equal in right and sovereignty and recognition, or the alternative, equal citizenship. But you can't have it both. One state for Israel and no state for Palestinians, or privileged citizenship for Israel and not for the Palestinians. You cannot have it. Either with the equality between a state or equality between persons. Any other solution is either apartheid or prolonging the occupation. So you cannot have it. Make your mind. Do you support the two-state solution? It has to be equal. Palestinians should establish a contiguous, viable state on every inch occupied in 1967, including East Jerusalem and Gaza. That's one solution that Palestinians accept. Or make it one state for all the citizens with no privilege to any group, one person, one vote, just like what happened in South Africa. Would you accept that? They will say no. Then what is the solution? Exactly the question asked by President Carter when he put that book. Palestine, peace or apartheid. You can't have both. Peace or apartheid. So the peace either between two states or among individuals.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Um, I mean, there are so many more questions. I don't think we've got any questions from the audience yet. Uh, I mean, I'd like to ask what what do you see in the future as well? Like what what does a free Palestine mean to you? You sort of answered it as well. It could be a couple of ways. Uh, but
I mean,
maybe the question is what needs to happen? What can take us
I
there?
mean, it's clear, I think, after what happened in Gaza, I think the world is realizing they cannot continue like that. Cannot. I mean, it's enough, but enough is enough. 56 years of occupation and 76 years of prolonged disposition and miseries of the Palestinian
Mm,
people and the refugees all over the world. They cannot continue like that. So the establishing a viable, independent Palestinian state, it could happen, and it's easy. I mean, if the U.S. and the European allies decide to and go tomorrow to the Security Council and adopt this resolution, recognize Palestine, and give 6 months to establish the Palestinian state, they will do it. They were so fast in cutting off South Sudan from Sudan. They were so fast in establishing East Timor. 1998 referendum, 2002 East Timor became a state. There is no problem if they want to. The one who is hindering the chances for a Palestinian independent state, in fact, is the US and the double standard and the hypocrisy of the European Union. Because they give you talk, we love the Palestinians, we want this, and they have privileged agreement with Israel. And they import all the products of the settlement. Yeah, maybe a few countries now mark, oh, this product of the settlement. Why you buy it? Why only you mark it? Why you shouldn't buy it? Because settlements are illegal and everything is planted on the land of the settlements is stolen from its original owner. Why you buy it?
If I may push back a bit, I mean, yes, they could quickly recognize the state, but what would it mean if you had your neighbor with the same genocidal ideology without dismantling that ideology? I mean, would that mean still a free Palestine future, or would it just mean just a prolonged or just a push of the conflict further?
Well, I don't want to predict, but if a Palestinian state is established, truly established, on the Palestinian land, and Gaza and West Bank are connected, it has its own viable ports and airports and routes through Jordan, Egypt, and airlines, and they have. I don't think the Palestinian state should not say, oh, we have to have a party that is ruling Israel in our favor. The same thing that Israel has no say who will be ruling the Palestinian people. It's not like what the Israeli ambassador to the UN, Gilad Erdan, came the other day with carrying the picture of Sinwar in the UN General Assembly. He said, this is the future president of Palestine. Who cares? Why it's your problem? I mean, if there is an independent Palestinian state, let the Palestinians elect whom they want. Why the Palestinians had to elect somebody who is liked by Israel and the US? Why not who's liked by his own people? What is democracy? It's a mockery. 2006, Hamas won the elections. And immediately the same day, Israel decided not to recognize the result of the election. The US followed, the European Union followed, and even the UN. Alvaro de Soto was the UN representative in Gaza. He resigned because he was giving instructions not to deal with the government, which was at that time a government run by Ismail Haniyeh.
Hamas leader.
Yeah, at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was elected.
Exactly. But I mean, How should I formulate this? Um, so the refugee question.
Yes,
We are now saying that, okay, a state with 22% of the land would be possible and would be acceptable, uh, according to the previous history of Palestinian leadership and the wishes of the people if that was represented. Um, but would 22% be enough to accommodate the refugees, for example? And I mean, once again, like, is 22% of historic Palestine fair?
of course it's not fair. The partition plan was not fair. Partition plan gave 56% of the Palestinian
Mhm,
land
mhm,
to the 30% immigrants.
mhm,
90% were recent immigrants. And the indigenous people who's living there for thousands of years were given 42%. And they constituted at that time over 70% of the population. So
mhm,
that was unfair.
mhm.
A few countries, Guatemala and this and
Yeah,
the Philippines, decided to partition Palestine. It
yeah.
was illegal partition. Anyhow, we don't want to talk that, but at this time now, okay, yes, 22% is too small. But to establish the principle, that is most important. The responsibility. Once the responsibility is established, and the Palestinians have the right to go back to their homes, and then they're given the chance. How many people will want to go back? It's up to them. Because the Resolution 194 talks about return, compensation, or compensation.
Mm,
Not return or compensation. Because if you return and the land was used by others, you have the right for compensation as well.
mhm. Yeah. But just
But
sorry, go ahead.
maybe some people will choose to live in the West Bank. I mean, there are areas in the West Bank which is very unpopulated, like some mountainous area. I'm not saying that
Mm,
I have the solution. I mean, the most knowledgeable Palestinian on the issue of refugees is Professor Salman Abu
Abu
Sitta.
Sitta, yes.
Yeah, he is the expert, and he put a map
Mm,
where Palestinians can go.
mm,
But again, if the Palestinians want to choose not to go back, let's say there
mm,
are people in Abu Dhabi
mm.
and in the US who are well-to-do, they have different national, and they decide that they're happy, but they will want to go back to see their country,
Yeah,
family.
yeah. But the problem becomes because where they would return to is not necessarily within the 22%, right? Because their houses, their belongings were taken away in what is called the 48 as well.
Yes. During the Camp David talks
Mhm,
in 2000, they agreed on the return of 100,000 Palestinians to the original homes.
mhm,
But then Ehud Barak said, okay, 10,000 a year for the next 10 years. But he was shrewd enough to say, under family reunification, not under the right of return.
Yeah.
Because the right of return establishes responsibility and moral obligations.
Mhm,
And the Palestinians at that time were willing to accept or to talk about it, which is called, as you know, the Resolution 242, which asked Israel to withdraw from the land it occupied in 1967, it talks about a just solution for the refugees.
mhm,
And from that day on, they start talking about just solution. What is a just solution?
mhm,
So who defined it? So I don't think once a Palestinian state is established and this state is viable and sovereign, really sovereign,
mhm,
and then they deal with the other issues, including the refugees. The refugees, some of them choose to go back to where they belong. Some of them choose the West Bank. Some of them choose to stay.
mhm,
Maybe the refugees in Lebanon will want to move to
mhm,
Palestine.
mhm,
Okay. So I don't think this is a reason we should make it the first obstacle at this moment. The most important is the end of occupation, the establishment of the Palestinian state to be guaranteed by world powers and the UN, and start making this state viable, connecting the West Bank with Gaza, allowing the Palestinians to thrive and re-establish themselves in their own state. They have their own economy. And Palestinian people are one of the most vibrant and active people. They're very intelligent. They have all kinds of expertise in the world because they've been scattered all over. You will find engineers and doctors and
within Gaza
architects.
itself, the education
Yeah,
rate of
exactly.
education is incredible.
It's unbelievable. People don't know that Gaza has one of the highest number of literate people in the world. Yeah. So Palestinian people can recover and establish, but freedom should come first. End of occupation, freedom, and establishing this viable, contiguous sovereign state.
To channel, as you mentioned, Dr. Salman Abu Sitta, he says a future with Zionism is not possible.
I agree. But I don't want to put it preconditions. I don't want to
I
put
understand.
that.
You see it more like an incremental thing.
Yeah,
where
but I think once the Palestinians put their foot on their own land, and truly they are free without Israeli interference. Okay, I think things will completely start to unravel, and this Zionism will be buried to the in the trash of history. I mean, this which means domination of other people and subjecting them for slavery and slavery for forever. It will not work.
Or extermination, one of those
or
two.
Extermination. Yeah, exactly that. Ben Ghafir gave the Palestinians three choices. Okay, either they leave or they accept to live just like, animals, eaten, or IDF will deal with them. That's what he said. Yeah.
No, I understand. Just to finish with my own understanding from this lecture is that something like that we have seen after the withdrawal from Gaza, that Palestinians had some sort of sovereignty, very, very limited, obviously, like with the blockade, but still within the borders of Gaza, they had the chance to decide their own with the limited resources. And that's why we're seeing that the resistance is capable of waging war after 8 months against one of the most powerful armies in the world.
Exactly.
With very, very simple armaments.
That very true. Very well said. Yeah. When the Palestinians were given this, it was imposed on them. But they managed to create from this impossible situation.
Yes.
Really miraculous.
Exactly. I mean, we will see, we will read this in history books, regardless of what happens. We will read about this in history books, inshallah.
Yes.
And from that, I got quite a lot of insights from this session. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I hope I was able to answer some of your questions, and I know it's a long lecture or long interview, but I hope we were able to.
For me, this was perfect. I've asked every single question I had, plus some. You have been very patient with us, and I don't see any questions from the audience. Because I was great in asking all the questions they had, maybe.
Thank you so much.
But no, thank you. It was great and honor for us. Thank you very much. If you want to have some closing remarks, please go ahead. Otherwise, we can finish it.
I truly appreciate your patience and listening to me, and I hope that you continue follow up with what happened in Palestine. I think Gaza became the symbol of the freedom cry around the world. It became also a symbol of injustice and atrocities committed against innocent people. Their guilt only is refusing to be subject to eternal occupation and subjugation and apartheid.
Exactly.
So we live in a world that will not accept that. I think apartheid regimes will end up in the bin of the trash bin of history. And I think the Palestinian, with all the sacrifices they put, they cannot go back to slavery and subjugation. Thank you again. And I strongly recommend that you stand with justice, freedom, and what is right.
Inshallah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, we thank everyone who joined us today. Share this later, because there will be a recording that you can find on YouTube. And keep fighting the good fight. And join us, by the way, in EPU. If you want to do more, we have a lot of things to do, and we need help. So join us. And with that, I thank you all, especially you, Dr. Siam.
Thank you so much.
Take care of yourselves.
Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.
Yes.